All around me are familiar faces, worn out places, worn out faces, bright and early for their daily races, going nowhere, going nowhere. Their tears are filling up their glasses. No expression, no expression. Hide my head, I wanna drown my sorrow. No tomorrow, no tomorrow. And I find it kind of funny, I find it kind of sad. The dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had. I find it hard to tell you, I find it hard to take. When people run in circles, it's a very, very mad world. Mad world. Children waiting for the day they feel good. Happy birthday, happy birthday. And I feel the way that every child should sit and listen, sit and listen. Went to school and I was very nervous. No one knew me, no one knew me. Hello, teacher, tell me what's my lesson. Look right through me, sit and listen. And I find it kind of funny, I find it kind of sad. The dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had. I find it hard to tell you, and I find it hard to take. When people run in circles, it's a very, very mad world. Mad world. Mad world. Mad world. A little over 3 years ago, pre-pandemic, I wrote the first version of this sermon, Pain of the World. And while doing so, that song, Mad World, by Tears for Fears, was playing on a loop in my head. I've loved it since it came out during my first year of high school. The entire album, The Hurting, remains one of my all-time favorites. But this song keeps coming back to me, or at very least the title, Mad World, captures how I feel most days. And boy, it's even been more so over the last 3-4 years. So I want to let you in on a little secret about me. I have a pretty bleak worldview. It may seem surprising because, for the most part, I am upbeat and friendly and feel compelled to spread love and joy. But the reason I am this way and do all these things is because, on a regular basis and for many years, I've really felt that humans are awful. It first occurred to me in my teens when I had a few devastating experiences. And then through a series of unfortunate events, I continued to think less and less of humanity. Not something a minister or peace educator should admit to, right? But I'm admitting it because A, it's true. B, I imagine others in the room might feel the same way to some extent that I do. And C, my doubt about humanity is and has been my core motivation to work for peace and justice my entire life. My father likes to remind me that I was a very sensitive child. I was serious. I actually have baby pictures where my brow is already deeply furrowed, like I'm thinking, oh no, I'm back. And apparently, as a child, I cried at the drop of a hat. Well, and I still do that. And if you knew me better, you'd totally understand. But I suppose I've always been an empath, hence my seriousness with a nice underlying layer of sadness. I think the word I'm looking for is Weltschmerz. It is an untranslatable German word roughly meaning world pain, or more particularly, a deep sadness about the imperfections of the world. Or maybe even more precisely, when the world as it is doesn't compare to what you think it should be. So yeah, I suffer from Weltschmerz. Anybody else? Thought so. Okay. Now, just before the pandemic shut down the world, I had spent a weekend at the Holy Cross Monastery on the Hudson River near my house. And I got into a conversation with a few fellow pilgrims. And one of them, a young man, about 20 years old, was reflecting on the sermon we had just heard. And he was talking about his desire to be more genuine and to be his real self in the world, and how hard it was for him. I engaged with him and replied something like, it's really hard because the world just bombards us with images and messages that tell us to be anything but our true selves. The woman next to me said, well, not everywhere. I always love those people, the not everyone or not everything. And the only thing I could reply was, perhaps, but I disagree. And I know, and I said this too, I know it's strange to hear someone who peddles in hope say something so negative, but the world can be rotten, and acknowledging that rottenness is what inspires me to do my work every day. I don't think that makes me a negative person at all, or even a misanthrope. Actually, as I said in my ordination benediction in 2019, I want us all to be brokers of justice and joy. My Weltschmerz is an unending source of inspiration for trying to do better, to make the world better. So I cannot ignore the pain and suffering I see or hear about every day. We cannot. But neither can we let it crush us. My husband, fearing for my well being a few years ago, forbade me, which is very funny because, I don't know, you don't know me that well, but I can't imagine you think anyone could forbid me from doing anything. But in and of itself, but I knew what his heart was. He was forbidding me to listen to Democracy Now! For a good stretch of time because I would call him from the car or once from a closet at Bosie's where I was working at the time because I was crying and I had to tell him how awful the world was. And I was like, how am I going to go into a room and talk to teachers and act like what I was going to teach them actually mattered in the grand scheme of things? Yeah. So we made the decision that I should cut back on social media and radio in general, and anything that forced my little empathic self into too much darkness. But that is a place of privilege. Sure, I can turn off Juan and Amy. I can stop reading the New York Times when it arrives in my inbox. I can avoid Instagram and Twitter. But what about the people who are living through these things? They don't get to turn them off, do they? And the harsh reality of today, our quasi maybe post pandemic time is that more and more of us are witnesses to and recipients of these local, global, and systemic catastrophes that cause great harm and suffering. And that brings me to the title and the concept, The Pain of the World. War, famine, drought, children in cages, refugees, children starving, unchecked greed, lying leaders, unjust justice systems, systemic violence, virulent racism, pandemic, misogyny, transphobia, unequal access to medicine, climate chaos, unnecessary poverty, removal of human rights, and the apparent death of democracy at the hands of unscrupulous and self-serving elected officials. It's enough to make you throw your hands up, stick your head in the figurative sand, and just sleep. Or watch TV. Or shop. Or do any other distraction that keeps us from really feeling our feelings, our sadness, our rage, our disappointment, our frustration, our Weltschmerz. But we have to feel it, because feeling it allows us to do something with it. All right, so how do we address the pain of the world? Buddhism's core teachings are about the nature of suffering, and the Buddha made a distinction between pain and suffering. Pain in life is inevitable, but suffering is not. Pain is what the world does to you. Suffering is what you do to yourself. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. So we can feel personal pain and or the pain of the world, but it need not turn into suffering or something that debilitates us. A teaching I regularly have to remind myself of. And then, Jesus taught us that blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. So if we give ourselves time and space to mourn the state of the world, we will find comfort. And Viktor Frankl wrote, "We who lived in concentration camps can remember the men who walked through the huts, comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a person but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." And Catholic theologian, priest, and Franciscan friar Richard Rohr says, "You can tell a lot about someone by what they do with their pain. Do they transform it, or do they transmit it?" All these teachings remind me that we are resilient, and we can take what we see in the world and let it crush us, or we can transform it. We can be resilient in our resistance, in our resolutions to help others, and to take action to dismantle unjust systems. But sometimes, like today in our post-COVID-ish world, after witnessing more than 1 million Americans die, hearing SCOTUS rulings removing bodily autonomy from women, more than 300 anti-trans bills being rammed through different states in the United States, the disempowering of the EPA and the recent approval of more oil drilling in Alaska, and of course, letting the gun lobby win over and over and over again, it's hard to find that resistance and that resilience, the will to counter the Weltschmerz. But look around you, whether you're in person or on Zoom, because this is where we find the strength and the support and the comfort to do so, here in our UU community. Schenectady, but our greater UU community as well. Father Gregory Boyle of Homeboy Industries in California says, resilience is born by grounding yourself in your own loveliness, hitting notes you thought were way out of your range. I love that, so I'm going to say it again. Resilience is born by grounding yourself in your own loveliness, hitting notes you thought were way out of your range. So as we gather together, and many of you, perhaps like me, name our Weltschmerz, feel our pain, and decide not to succumb to apathy or despair. What is your loveliness? What is your gift? What can you do to address the ills of the world? Roland Arzabal wrote songs. Father Greg started an outreach program for former gang members. We write letters to TV stations, senators, and newspapers. We send postcards to voters. We march, we strike, we feed one another. We throw parties. We volunteer, we vote. We remember to breathe before we speak our own pain so that it doesn't get transferred onto someone else. We remember that we are a community, that we are the change we wish to see in the world, and we are the support, strength, and comfort we need as we witness and live with the pain of the world. As the Talmud reminds us, do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now. Love mercy now. Walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. So I ask you, as just a guest in your pulpit, what are you called to do in this UU community and beyond that helps us address the pain of the world? Our pain must be transformed into something that shows our resilience, because as Auden wrote, evil is unspectacular and always human, and we are introduced to goodness each day. So even with a bleak worldview and an overwhelming sense of Weltschmerz, we can find the goodness. We can be the goodness. We can be the brokers of joy and justice that the world so desperately needs. May it be so. And I invite you all to join me in our closing hymn. Okay. Please rise in body or in spirit as you are able. For number 347, Gather the Spirit. want to take time to thank you all for giving me the honor of serving very much behind the scenes as your sabbatical minister for these past 3 months and being your guest preacher a few times. I want to thank the tech deck for all they do. Julie Penke, our filling in on piano. Robin, fantastic worship associate. And I personally want to thank Susan and Kristin and Maria, who's not here, who really helped me get into the flow of things. So thank you, everyone. And thanks to everyone who's volunteering. I think, Robin, you wanted to add an announcement before the benediction. Do you want to?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. I failed to mention coffee. There is coffee after the service today in the dining room if you are interested in joining us for some coffee and conversation.
Thank you. Our benediction are words by Andrea Hawkins Kemper. May we see all as it is, and may it all be as we see it. May we be the ones to make it as it should be. For if not us, who? If not now, when? This is answering the cry of justice with the work of peace. This is redeeming the pain of history with the grace of wisdom. This is the work we are called to do, and this is the call we answer now. To be the barrier and the bridge, to be the living embodiment of our principles, to be about the work of building the beloved community, to be a people of intention and a people of conscience. May it be so.